what is the biggest thing that's keeping you stuck? Why do you feel discontent despite achieving what you thought you needed? Something's missing. You've tried other solutions, but nothing has truly fixed your problem, up until now. Download the 3 reasons you're feeling discontent and how to fix it fast at www.jedbrotherson.com and quickly create a clear roadmap that helps you find peace, clarity, and fulfillment. Welcome to the Pulverizing the Patterns podcast, where Jed Brotherson takes you on a journey to confront the roots of your discontent and emerge significant. Each week, we dive deep into themes like overcoming harmful family dynamics, standing up for yourself with courage, speaking out against injustice, and cultivating healthy, authentic relationships. Be sure you visit our website at www.pulverizingthepatterns.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now, get ready for empowering stories, expert insights, and actionable strategies that help you break free from negative patterns and create a life rooted in self-respect, clarity, and connection.
Today's guest is Liam Naden, a speaker, teacher, author, and researcher, best known for helping people understand how to use their brain the right way to create real success and eliminate struggle. After a dramatic fall from a seemingly successful life, Liam uncovered a powerful shift, one that aligned with him with peace, purpose, and prosperity. In this episode, we explore how the brain truly works, why struggle is optional, and how rewiring our internal operating system can pulverize patterns holding us back. Get ready to hear insights on biology, belief, and breakthrough from someone who has lived both the fall and the freedom. Liam, welcome to the show today. We appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks, Jed. Thanks for having me. Great to be here. Love the hat.
Thanks. Hey, Liam, could you take us back before the breakthrough? What did life look like for you when you were successful on paper?
Well, I was probably like many people who claim to be successful, and that is, I had a lot of really great things in my life. I was a millionaire. I had the freedom to travel and do things that I wanted to do. I'd always been an entrepreneur through most of my adult life. I've had 18 different businesses in all sorts of fields. And so I was doing pretty well on the outside. But, and here's the thing, and perhaps I can draw your attention or paint a picture of a pivotal moment in my life, which was when I was just putting the finishing touches on my dream home. I'd always had my goals lists and I'd done lots of motivational seminars and workshops on how to create success. And on my goals list was a particular type of house, a magnificent house with a wonderful view and also one that contained a music room, because I'd been a musician earlier in my life, and I always had this idea, if I had a music room, I can just go in there and play my music and listen to my music and just, that would be bliss for me. But anyway, there's this particular day when I was just putting the finishing touches. It was almost finished. And I went into the music room because it had a music room. And I sat down and I thought, this is amazing, because here I am. I had this goal of a music room and this house. This was on my goals list. I had the view of being a millionaire, of having all the money I really needed or wanted, of having freedom to do things, to travel. And I've had some amazing trips around the world. So what I should feel is really excited, really grateful, really with a sense of, I've made it. I've achieved it. I've figured out what life's all about. And I really feel so deeply content and satisfied. It's all been worth it. But in actual fact, I felt the opposite. I felt so unhappy, so stressed. I was almost shaking. I was almost in tears with the stress, because I still had a lot of problems in my life. A lot of things weren't going well. And it was like, every time I thought I was sorting my life out, a whole lot of other problems kept showing up. Sort of unexpected things. And I had problems with my staff and my businesses and my marriage, relationships in general. And things, I just felt like I was continually fighting all the time, trying to struggle to get ahead, so that whenever I did achieve anything, apart from a momentary, feeling, a bit of satisfaction, then all the problems came back. I never really felt like I was getting ahead. And I said this particular day, maybe what I should do is just throw all this away. Because really, to be honest, I'd rather have nothing as long as it meant that I saved my soul, because that's what it's felt like. It felt like my whole life energy was being drained out of me. My soul, it just felt like life was hardly worth living.
Mm.
So that was the point I was at. And it was like, I kept questioning, why is it like this? And okay, sure, I've been to all the seminars and listened to all the gurus and done all the spiritual work, which says problems are a natural part of life. You have to learn how to overcome your problems. And in fact, problems and obstacles are really good for you. We measure success in other people and how many problems they've overcome, don't we? We admire people who've achieved great things despite all of the odds, and we have this idea that the more problems we have, and it makes us stronger. We overcome our problems and it makes us a better person. Now, I've since learnt that none of that is true. But anyway, I bought into that idea because it made life a bit more bearable, and it certainly explained what I was doing, but it didn't make me feel any better. And I said, I know I've got to be stronger. I know I'm not strong enough, but how strong do I have to be? Is there ever an end to it? It not only doesn't feel like there's no end, it doesn't feel like it's getting any better at all. So maybe I'd rather just toss it all away and give up on this idea of trying to improve myself, trying to overcome all my problems, and just get rid of my problems by just saying, forget it. And that's essentially where I'd got to.
Yeah, what an amazing story. So inside the adversity, with the struggle that you mentioned, like with staff, or you have these patterns that keep coming back into your life, and through the adversity, and much like yourself, I know that I bought into that same belief. Like the troubles and the trials make us better. So just keep going. And
yeah,
with the current skill set that I had in the past. And so how did having this adversity, like I think you kind of covered it with it kind of made you feel like, is all of this worth it? Am I giving too many pieces of myself to too many different people? How did this adversity really help you start going into looking at the brain and how the brain works? Well,
the funny thing was, that wasn't the real adversity.
Oh, okay.
Real adversity happened a few weeks later when I literally did lose everything.
Oh.
I became homeless. Everything went, my businesses, my marriage, the house with the music room, it all just collapsed like they call it pile of cards. Yeah. And really quickly. And I ended up having to move back in with my elderly mother and sleep on the sofa in the living room of her small apartment in a strange town that I hadn't been to for years, And so that's pretty well a big shock and a bit of a rock bottom place to get to. Because here's the thing too about that experience was it wasn't so much losing all my stuff. I mean, I literally came away with the clothes on my back, but it was losing my sense of who I was, and I thought my life was working in a funny sort of a way. There were problems, there was stress, there was all this horrible stuff, but I had a home, and I felt I was in control. But what I realized is I wasn't in control. I thought I was, and I thought the way to get into control was to keep doing more of what I was doing, but somehow it didn't work. And I was lying on my mother's sofa, I remember this clearly, night after night, trying to get to sleep, and it was a pretty uncomfortable sofa. And I kept asking myself two questions. And the first question was, why has this happened to me? Because I was a good person. I hadn't, done anything illegal or anything like that. And I'd really studied success. I'd not only worked really hard and worked on business and, went for every opportunity I could to learn, but I also tried to learn about the whole area of how you create success in your life. As I said, I went to lots of seminars. I read lots of books on personal development, self-help, peak performance, goal setting, rewiring your subconscious mind, changing your beliefs, doing all these things. But I had this amazing goals list with everything mapped out, 5-year plans and pictures and everything like that. But this situation wasn't on my goals list. And I was like, this wasn't supposed to happen. why has this happened to me? Because I'm a master of success. I've spent my life trying to figure out how for this not to happen, but it has. So that was the first question, why has this happened to me? And the second question was, what do I do now? Because here I was with nothing. I had no money. I had less than no money. I had debts, people after me for money. And I had no opportunities. I was somewhere where I didn't know anybody. And I thought, what do I do now? And it took me a long time to come up with the answer to both of those questions. And the breakthrough pivotal moment was realizing the true answer to both of those questions was actually the same. They both had the same answer. And so why has this happened to me? And what do I do now? Can anyone listening guess what the answer to both of those questions is? Here's the answer. It is, I have no idea. I don't know. I don't know. And when I accepted, I didn't realize this at the time, but I've come to understand how this works biologically and scientifically, how this whole process of shifting from a state of trying to figure everything out to using a different part of your brain, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But when I accepted I didn't know the answer to those questions, and I stopped trying to figure out the answer, I shifted the way my brain worked. And that's when things started to go in a different direction. And it was like things just started to come along. For instance, a few weeks after that, a business opportunity came along, and it was in really strange circumstances the way it all happened. It was all like, you might think coincidence or luck, or, somebody showed up in my life that I hadn't seen for 25 years, and he said, hey, why don't you do that? Here's an opportunity that's near where I have my business. You'd be perfect for it. And other people helped me with money and, the resources to set it up. So then I was literally within a few months, I had my own business and I was earning good money again. This was starting with nothing. I moved out from the sofa in my mother's apartment. And then other things just started to show up. I met a new woman who became my partner, completely different to anyone I'd ever had a relationship with. And then we started to travel and do things, amazing things, travel all around New Zealand, my home country, in a motorhome. Then we went off to Europe on a one-way ticket and bought a yacht, sailed all around Europe. And then we set up some more businesses as we were doing this. I sold the first business, and then we had, I think, 3 other businesses. And the really strange part about all of this was, and it really hit me when I was in the Greek islands, anchored it on our yacht. You can picture this scene. We're a beautiful bay, no other boats around, just waking up in the morning. You've been at anchor all night. It's really peaceful and calm. Have a swim. And then I was getting out, and as I was drying myself, I thought, this is it. I've made it. Here I am on my own yacht in the Greek islands. I've got 2 businesses that are pretty well running themselves. I have to do some work, but they're all around the world. I'm not struggling and they're going really well. But the really weird thing is, not only don't I really have any problems, but I've got the feeling that I was always looking for. I thought back at that time to the music room and how stressed and unhappy I was, and said, is this what it's all about? But on the yacht, things were working so well, and I felt this is what it's all about. It's this feeling that I've been looking for all my life, not just of having the stuff. And, I had a great lifestyle, obviously, as you can imagine, but the feeling of being in control of your life, of knowing that you're doing the right thing. And most importantly, not having all the problems and stress and struggle, because I didn't have any. And I realized I had a big problem, my only problem, and that was, how did this happen? And what do I do now? I asked those same questions. Why has this happened to me? And what do I do now? And I said to myself, I need to figure out what I'm doing differently, because whatever it is, I want to make sure I keep doing it. Because I was confused, because I said, before I spent all my time and energy working really hard to achieve as much as I could in my life. I went after every opportunity. I had all my goals written down. I'd learned everything I could. I'd read books and go to seminars and train my brain and work on, affirmations and meditation and all of these practices and routines and discipline. And what happened is it all just created this big mess of stress and then fell apart. And now my life is working really well, but I'm not setting any goals. I'm not going after any opportunities. I'm not trying to figure out what to do. I'm not chasing information. I'm not trying to look at what I need to learn. If something comes along, I might learn it, but I'm not doing that. But it's like things are coming after me. What am I doing differently? And that became my mission, to figure out what I was doing differently. And it all led me back to how we're biologically designed to operate, how we're naturally designed not to have problems and struggle in our life. And I know the problem, if you like, is that's become the norm. The way we live is what we think life is all about. But it's not. And it actually, for most of human history, hasn't been. And that's really what I do now, is research more and more and help people understand that we have a different way of operating, a way that's completely different and that's far more natural than what we've ever been taught about. That's what I do now.
Man, that's such an amazing story. You've covered so much ground here. But so what I've noticed is that when clients start to realize that they've been living in survival mode, it can be just as you described, disorienting. Like, life can be falling apart. It can truly be like a vulnerable awakening. And so, man, the way you've described that it felt like emotionally, and you started to go into this mental shift from, would you say it was going from a survival mode? I mean, even though you were a millionaire at one point and had all these things, with all that stress recurring and all those patterns recurring, would you still say you were living in survival and then transitioning to truly surrendering?
Yeah, well, you use two words, survival and surrendering. I put it in a slightly different way.
Okay.
And because I think there's an essential problem we have with that word, surrendering.
Okay.
You know, and when I said I didn't know the answer to those questions and I gave up and I said, we'll just see what happens, that's not really surrendering as we, what we think of surrendering, what most people think of surrendering is just giving up and hoping things get better. But they don't really surrender. It's a bit like prayer. Most people pray for something and say they have faith, but they don't really have faith. What they have is hope. So for most people, they say, I surrender. But what I say is, well, I just hope things are going to get better, and I'm, going to hope that what I do. But it's still an internal struggle. There's still an internal resistance that you have there towards this idea of surrendering, because it feels scary. It's fearful to say, I'm going to surrender. So people never really let go. And the reason they don't really let go is they don't understand how it works. Not in some spiritual or, esoteric way, but how it works biologically and what surrendering actually means biologically. Because here's the thing, as you might know from looking at my work, I'm basically looking at the biology of how we operate, how all of nature operates. And there are essentially two mental states. One is stress and survival and reaction to threat and danger. We call it the fight-flight, which is a simplification, but that's a way of understanding it. So we have this brain state where if there's something dangerous in our environment that might hurt us, we can react against it, and we do that instinctively. So, a car comes out in front of us, so we jump out of the way. Or somebody says something hurtful to us, so we shout back at them. Or we get aggressive with somebody. Or somebody tries to get aggressive with us, and we protect ourselves by lashing out or running away. These are all instinctive ways of protecting ourselves from immediate danger. And that's a really useful thing. But the signal from your brain to your body when you're faced with an immediate danger is fear, stress, anxiety, worry. Those are all signals from your brain telling you that somehow there's something in your environment that's a threat to your survival. This is the way the brain works. Now, that's really useful when you actually have a threat to your survival in your world. So if someone really is going to take your money or has taken your money, or someone is going to hit you, or someone is going to harm you in some way physically, then you want that response to be there. But what we've done, we've trained our brain the wrong way to get it to see imaginary threats. And because the brain can't see the difference between the present and the future, it sees it as a threat. So it immediately activates fear, stress, and worry and tries to get you to force a solution. So, for instance, the reason I had so much stress and worry in my previous life was my brain was telling me, you don't have enough. You don't have enough money. All right, you're a millionaire, but one day somebody might take it all from you. You might not have enough money in the future. So my brain is saying, you have no money. And it's keeping him in that stressed state. But here's the thing about that stress state is that it gets you to do all the wrong things because it's a very limited awareness state. So that's why we keep tripping ourselves up. That's why people never get unstuck like I didn't, because we're continually using the part of our brain that can't get us unstuck. All it can do is react. All it can do is, it can't think. It can't come up with solutions. They're in a different part of your brain. And the other part of your brain is what I call your thriving brain. And your thriving brain is the part of your brain that gives you all the resources you need to be your best, which is your natural state. So in other words, anytime you're not faced with a threat to your survival, you're supposed to be thriving. You're supposed to be having a good life. You're supposed to be doing all the good things that are going to extend your life and make your life more worth living, because from a biological perspective, that is the purpose of your life, is to survive. And you survive the best when you're thriving, when you're being the best, when you're healthy, when you're happy. You make the right decisions, you do the right things, you live longer, and you have a more productive life. So when that part of the brain is operating, the thriving brain, you have access to things like the answer to problems. This is when, you're trying to figure out a problem and you've spent weeks on it and you've got all your lists out and you've asked people and tried to figure it out, and you just can't think of the right decision. And then one day when you're not thinking about it, you suddenly go, that's the answer. That's what I should do. Why didn't I think of it before? Well, the reason you didn't think of it before is you weren't accessing the part of your brain that had the answer. You were stuck in the part of your brain that's all about stress and I've got to try and figure it out, and what happens if I can't, and I need to learn more, and somebody needs to show me the answer. I need to analyze everything. That's that stressed, frustrated, stuck state that you'll never find the answer there. It's in that other part. So, and inspiration, where you get new ideas, where you see new opportunities, where you feel motivated to do things. Think, that's a great idea. I'm going to do that. And you just do it, and it all flows. And, people have described the state in many different ways: being in the flow, being in the zone, even being enlightened to a degree. And we've all had that experience, probably not very often, where you just feel like everything's going well, everything's falling into place. That's the way we're biologically designed to live all of the time. And when you realize that, when you understand that, all you need to do, instead of saying, well, I surrender and, I'm going to pray and I'll just give up while you're holding on to the things really tightly inside and just hoping things are going to improve, when you understand how your brain works and that it has this thriving state, all you need to do is learn how to activate that state. And then you're going to get the right ideas. Then you're going to get the inspiration, the motivation, the creativity. And it's also when things are going to show up in your life. And most of the opportunities that show up in your life aren't necessarily because some, random event. They're because you saw something that you wouldn't have seen otherwise. You see opportunities. You have a much greater awareness about what's actually going on, both in your own life and in the world in general, when you activate this thriving brain. So really the only mission in life that we all have is to learn how to activate this part of our brain and shut down the other part of our brain. And that's what I did without realizing it. And that's when the magic starts to happen. And you can get rid of all the stress. And I know everybody says that, you won't have stress and worry. You won't have stress and worry. The reason being, that doesn't help your survival. When you operate your thriving brain, it's all about making you your best so that you survive for the longest. That's your biological purpose. And if you've got stress and problems and worries and struggles, that doesn't extend your life. That shortens your life, it gives you diseases and, stops you from doing things. So that's why all of those things, the thriving brain is designed to ensure those things don't exist in your life. And, nature has had a long time to figure out how to make every species, including humans, as efficient as possible at surviving. And anything that's in a species that's weak or wasteful or doesn't do it the best way, it gets weeded out of the species. So by now, every species, including humans, has perfected this ability to really thrive, not to live with problems and stress all the time. But we've just been taught all the wrong stuff about how it works, and that's why we're stuck.
Yeah. Thank you for those insights. You know, your story actually similarly reminds me of Job in the Bible. I don't want to like make you uncomfortable with any comparisons, but my idea of surrendering is, you know, Job had all these things happening to him. He had all of his neighbors coming and asking him, "What did you do? What did you do?" But because he never fell victim to, man, I must have messed up someplace. And so in my mind, the surrender is not falling into placing blame or guilt and all of these negative things that you're talking about. We have to stay away from in this fear brain. And am I kind of, I think of getting that right. And then I think we're going into the four functions of the brain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, just to talk about this idea of surrendering, most of what we do in our life, 99% of the time we spend in our life is based on faith. You know, you believe that your heart is going to keep beating, that you're going to keep breathing, that the sun's going to set tonight and come up in the morning, that, you know, all of the bodily functions that are happening in your body are going to carry on. But would you call that surrender? Would you say, well, I surrender and just allow that to happen? Or would you say, I just know that's the way it works. I don't need to think about it. And why would I question any of that? Why would I worry about any of that? You don't sit down at night and think, oh, I hope I'm going to wake up in the morning. Or when you're breathing, oh, I hope I breathe again. So our lives are built on faith. But here's a good example. Imagine if you have a motor car and it's a machine and you're told, well, all it does, it's only designed for one thing. It gets you from where you are to where you want to go. And it's going to do it reliably, efficiently, and guaranteed if you use it the right way. That's what it's designed to do. And this is how you use it. You don't stand behind it and push it. That's not going to work. Put all that effort and determination and motivation and have beliefs and things. That's not going to work. No, you just understand how it works. So you get in the car and you know how it works. You have an experience of it working the way it's supposed to, and you just drive it. But that's not surrender, is it? That's understanding. You don't say, I surrender to this car and hope it gets me to where I am. You go, no, this is just the way it works. And you don't worry whether someone's going to, cars coming the other way are going to veer and hit you. You just know that they won't. You have an experience of it. You know how it works, and you have an experience of it working the right way. So it's not about surrender. You don't surrender to it, you just do it. And it's exactly the same with your brain. Once you understand how it works, you don't need to think about it, you don't need to worry about it, you don't need to hope or even surrender. You just go, well, I'm just using it the way it works. It's just the natural way of doing it. And here's something really interesting, if I could just throw this in. I'm not sure how much time we've got, and I know I talk a lot. What really puzzled me, and I did some research about this, human beings have been around for about 300,000 years. And for 97% of the time that we've lived, we lived really healthy lives. We lived there was no such thing as war. There was no such thing as conflict. Mentally and physically, we were much, much healthier and stronger than we are today. And I know that goes against all of the wisdom that we've heard. Oh, cavemen were primitive and, they lived these brutal, horrible, short, dangerous lives. None of that's actually true. There's no archaeological evidence to show that. They were taller, they had stronger bones. All of the diseases that we have didn't exist. But something happened about 12,000 years ago, and we made this big shift. And it was after then, and only after then, that we started to have wars and problems and disease and famine. There was no starvation before about 12,000 years ago. And we had all of this conflict, and we all had all this mental dissatisfaction, all of which carries on today. So I wanted to figure out, obviously for 97% of the human history, when we were living in what was a natural way, must have been, because we were like the rest of nature. We were thriving. We were strong, healthy, living much longer and healthier lives than even we do today. Again, this is controversial for me to say this, but when you actually do a bit of research, you find there's no evidence whatsoever for this, desperate caveman mentality. It's the exact opposite. So I wanted to figure out, we must have been doing something different. And the one thing we were doing was we were using our brain differently. So surely that's a clue to say, we're using our brain the wrong way. It's creating all this dysfunction in the world. Maybe I should figure out what we used to do, what created thriving in the human race.
Yeah. What did create thriving in the human race? As we start to wrap up here with about 10 minutes, you've developed these 4 functions of the brain. Could you walk us through how these 4 functions work? I mean, I think that's a good segue, talking about figuring out how the brain works, going into these four functions that you found.
Sure. Well, these aren't just 4 functions, they're 4 separate biological places in your brain that do something different. So really, really briefly, you probably only need to understand 2 of them, but there's the thinking, what I call the thinking brain, which has a scientific term. And the thinking brain is where you do your thinking from. So it's where we use language, we store all the information that we've gathered in our life, and we put labels on things so that we can refer back to them. So you can look at a tree and say, that's a tree, and you can say to someone else, I'm looking at a tree, and we can talk to other people and know what we're talking about. Yeah. So communication. The second one is your emotional brain, which is located just below your thinking brain in your skull, and that's responsible for how you feel. So it generates emotions, obviously good and not so pleasant emotions. Yeah. And the third part of the brain is this, what I referred to earlier, is about which generates the survival state, which is your survival brain. And this is where this manages all of your survival functions, including all the things you don't have to think about, like most things, how your body works. And it also controls this response to danger, this threat, fight, flight response. And the fourth part of your brain, I've also referred to that, is your thriving brain. This is actually a biological part of your brain, because this is where the things that don't come from your thoughts are all generated, such as your motivation. We've talked about these before as well. Your awareness, your creativity, your imagination, your inspiration, getting new ideas, getting aha moments, creating things. These all come from your thriving brain. So these 4 parts all have a different function, but the key thing is to use them in a way where you keep the thriving brain active. So you're in this thriving state. So you're continually opening yourself to inspiration, motivation, creativity, solving problems if they show up, knowing the right thing to do at the right time. I mean, how often do we all make terrible blues, sometimes big ones, like marrying the wrong person, and you're walking down the aisle and you think, I shouldn't be doing this. There's a little voice inside you going, you really shouldn't be doing this. Or you really should do that, but you're afraid to do it because you're worried that it won't turn out right. But there's something in you that thinks, I should do that. Why can't I do it? I should do it. All of this information, if you like, is all in your thriving brain. And if you use that all the time, you're going to make the right decisions. You're going to do the right things. Because remember, your brain is designed to make you do the right things so that you survive for as long as possible and have as good life as possible. That's the biological purpose.
That sounds great. Is there like a simple daily practice that you would recommend for listeners to help kind of cultivate the use of the thriving brain that would begin moving them forward to a more empowered, enlightened state daily? Like a morning meditation, or is there something that you do?
The best thing I can suggest to people is to go to my website, liamnaden.com, and start to understand this. Because the problem with we're in a world where everyone says, tell me how to do it. What's the one thing I can do to fix myself? And we've become addicted to all these quick fixes. And I spent decades trying to fix things, but it doesn't work for 2 reasons. One is there's no such thing as a quick fix. And the second reason is that that's the wrong place to look. It's a little bit like just quickly saying, if someone said to you, well, I'm overweight and I want to lose weight, and you're a health expert, how do I lose weight? The simple answer is, well, you stop eating the wrong food and you do some exercise. Mm. So the simple answer, but it's not a quick fix, is it? Because you have to understand, you have to retrain your body, you have to retrain your thoughts about eating the right food and getting off all your addictions to the wrong food. So it's a process, but the more you understand it, the more you understand what bad food does to your body, and the more you understand what your addictions are and how to get over them, then the easier it becomes to change your habits. So it's the same with changing your brain and the way you use your brain, use your life. The quick answer is, here's the quick fix: start using your creative brain, your thriving brain, rather than your survival brain to manage your life. That's the answer. But how to do that, you need to sort of understand it a bit more. And then you don't need a quick fix, because the problem is if you just sit down and do something like a meditation or a thought, I did those for years. None of those work either. You're sitting there hoping that the words you're saying are going to come true. That doesn't work. You need to get in and work on, use the machinery in a different way. Same with a motor car. If your young son came and said, "Can I borrow the car?" and you say, "Well, you don't know how to drive it." "Oh, well, give me a quick tip on how to drive it because I want to go to a party over 100 miles away tonight, and then I can learn about how to use it later. Just give me a quick tip so then it'll work."
Right.
So that's not how it works. You have to understand it, you have to practice it, and you have to use it so that you see the results.
Right. So people who will visit that site, because they do have to understand how the brain's mechanics align with that deeper spiritual or intuitive wisdom to get the fix. Yeah, I love the way that you said that. I did want to ask if there's the people that you work with, is there one pattern that you find that recurs that a lot of people have that they don't even know they have?
The biggest pattern and the biggest mistake people don't realize they're making is they're relying on their thinking for their life.
Mm.
Now, and there's lots of reasons for this. And when I mentioned there was a big shift 12,000 years ago, we went from being instinctive to thinking. And we might think that's an advance and a development, but I've got a book that I'm working on writing at the moment, which explains why thinking has been the cause of all our problems.
Mm-hmm.
And when you move into the thriving brain, which remember is not your thought, not your thinking brain, you realize that it's your thoughts that hold you back. So the biggest aha moment, the biggest thing that people understand, the biggest shift they make when they work through what I teach people, the biggest thing they realize is they're not going to get it through their thoughts. They're not going to figure this stuff out. They're not going to be able to work out how to solve their problems or what their goals should be or how to make their life as good as they want it to be. It's not in that part of the brain. The thinking is the limitation. And I've interviewed so many successful people who've told me they didn't have a goals list because if they did, they wouldn't have done what they did. I spoke to one man who was a billionaire and he said, it was never on it. If he'd had a goals list, it would never have been on it.
Mm.
In my life, sailing around the world, traveling, being a nomad for the last 15 years, which I'm on my yacht at the moment here in Italy, I could never have dreamt that I'd be doing that.
Yeah.
So you have to get out of this idea that you can think your way to success. And I know we've all been taught that, thoughts and how you think and grow rich and all that. But unfortunately, it's not how the brain works. And when people make that shift and realize that, which only comes through understanding, it doesn't come from saying, well, that's a good idea, I'll try it. I'll surrender and let go. You have to start to understand it so that therefore you go, well, that makes sense, I'll apply it. And when you apply it and you see the results, you start to see how it actually works. So that's the big shift. That's the shift I made when I said I don't know the answer to these questions.
Right.
I stopped trying to think. I stopped trying to figure it out. I stopped trying to use this thinking part of my brain and realized there's another part of my brain that actually was the way we're naturally designed to solve problems, the way we're naturally designed to be our best. It's not the thinking part.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. So you mentioned the site where people can find your work, and you've got this book coming out. So I'll encourage listeners to keep watching and stay updated for the book release that you've got coming. Liam, I thank you for being here. Are there any final words of encouragement or clarity that you'd like to leave the listeners with just a minute?
The only thing is just think about nature. We're all governed by the laws of nature. We can't walk off a 10-story building and expect to go up in the air. So you have a biological nature that doesn't really care what you want. It wants what's best for you. And this is biology. So start to understand what your biological nature is and that it overrides everything. And it's designed to make life not a struggle. It's not a struggle for the rest of nature. We're the only ones for whom struggle, dysfunction is the norm. The rest of nature thrives, overall. So make that your focus. So I'm going to look somewhere different to where I've been looking. I've been looking in my thoughts and information and thinking and goal setting and, trying to figure it out and all that neuroplasticity and all those buzzwords. I'm not going to look there anymore. I'm going to see maybe there's something instinctual, something natural that can come out of me.
Thank you for tuning into the Pulverizing the Patterns podcast. where Jed Brotherson takes you on a journey to confront the roots of your discontent and emerge significant. Remember to visit our website at www.pulverizingthepatterns.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Pulverizing the Patterns podcast.